Hello, my name is Mark Wade, and I am an avid photographer, and I hope you are too. We are in the first part of the series where we're trying to just learn the basics of photography, how to get a good exposure, and how to get to that point. We just talked about ISO and how that sets the sensitivity of gain to your sensor. Obviously, this is digital photography. It's not film. If it was film, we would be talking about ASA, which is essentially sensitivity of film. I just wanted to get into this next part because it is in direct relation to the ISO. I'm kind of working in reverse. ISO might be one of the last things you think of, because one of the things I also want to talk about is aperture. Now, aperture is basically the size of the hole that your camera looks, that your lens is set to. A larger hole has a smaller number, and a smaller hole has a larger number. I don't know why that is, honest with you. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me why they do it that way. I'm sure there's a good reason. If you want to tell me about it, go ahead and tell me why down in the descriptions or tell me down in the comment section. But it just doesn't matter to me. I never cared about that. So what I want to do is show you what happens when you set aperture. And I've got this little lens here. It's a Helios 44-2. It's an old Russian lens. Yeah, love these cool little lenses and things like that. We will get into these kinds of creative lenses and how to use them and what to do and why they're so cool. And I got this one fairly inexpensively, and then I modified it myself, and I felt like if I broke it, oh well. But that's beside the point. Aperture will do several things. Now I just wanted to show you what it means to set aperture with this lens in itself. Okay. Now this aperture ring is in front, which is kind of weird, but let me see if we can get this to work. So there's the lens itself, and it's pretty much wide open. It's like an f2. And then we can stop it down. We can stop it down to about f16 or f22, wherever it is. It's not important to know that number right now, but that is the larger numbered aperture. Okay, so I did all that. It doesn't really matter at this point. Just to know that the hole can be smaller with your blades, or it can make it bigger. And so that will dictate how much light is coming through onto your sensor or film at any given time. Okay, so that's what that is. Aperture is the size of the hole that you allow for the light to come in. And it will dictate how fast your shutter needs to be, along with your ISO. They will all work in harmony with one another when we're all said and done. Now, a couple of things to consider. If you're going to close it down, right, if your shutter is going to be really, really small, if your shutter hole's tiny, you're going to get a lot of things in detail. And maybe that's what you want to do. But because now the light is coming through at a much slower speed, what does that mean? That means you're going to have to leave it open longer. Your shutter time is going to be longer than if you were to open it all the way up. Now, if you open it up all the way, you're going to get less things in focus, especially if you're really close. Like right now, I'm shooting at 1.4. I'm shooting with the Sony 1.4. And so even though it's a wide angle lens, there's probably a little blur behind me because at 1.4, that's what you're going to get is a lot of blur behind you. And you're going to get whatever's in focus. But the rest of the photograph behind whatever's in focus and in front of whatever's in focus is going to be blurred out. So those are the characteristics of using your aperture. How much detail do you want? How much blur do you want? There's also bokeh to consider as well, which is kind of that blurry look in the background. If you have lights that are in the background, those will look different as well. So all of those things are in there to consider, but basically I'm just telling you about aperture. Aperture is either small or large, and it affects your depth of field. That's what I was talking about. With things that are blurry or things that are in focus. The depth of field, that's the thing that aperture controls. So you might be thinking, well, what's the big deal? Well, it's a big deal. Does a painter just start painting a painting and says, I don't care if it's in focus, or I don't care if it's hyper-realism, or if it's more like an abstract and where everything is moody and everything is, a painter considers everything in his painting. Why wouldn't a photographer do that? You should be doing that too. You don't take everything for granted. You don't let the camera do it for you. You take care of that yourself because you are responsible for the final output, right? So the next thing we're going to talk about is shutter speed. And we're going to bring it all together. And those are the three main components that go into your exposure making. And we're going to talk about other things after that as well. And eventually we're going to get into philosophy and composition. But these are the two main things. And then of course, shutter speed will be our last one. And that might only take a couple of minutes for me to explain that to you. I already talked about it a little bit. So thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And if you're not an avid photographer, by the time you're done watching this stuff, I hope you get inspired to get out there and become an avid photographer. Thank you for listening.